Welcome to our deep dive today into the art of writing well. We're going to be looking at your stack of articles and notes, all pointing back to William Zinssers on writing well. So are you ready to cut through all the clutter and really get to the good stuff? You know, the stuff that'll help you write with more clarity and confidence and personality.
It's amazing how Zinser's principles really resonate across so many different types of writing. I mean, you could be crafting an email or a report, or even that novel you've been thinking about writing,
Mhm.
the fundamentals are still going to hold true. It all comes down to clear thinking and empathy for your reader and respect for the power of language.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that really jumped out at me from your notes was this idea of the rewriting revolution. You highlighted a section about how email and word processors, while making us more fluent, haven't necessarily made us better writers. Why is that?
Well, Zinser argues that technology, while liberating us from the dreaded blank page, has also fostered a culture of verbosity. We're churning out words faster than ever, but are we taking the time to refine them? He believes that good writing doesn't emerge fully formed. It's the result of careful and deliberate rewriting. That's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, he tells that great anecdote about the doctor who claimed writing was easy because the words just seemed to flow onto the page.
Yeah,
But Zinsser pushes back on that notion, right?
absolutely. He emphasizes that for most writers, including professionals, writing is hard work. It's about wrestling with your thoughts, shaping them and honing them until they're clear and compelling. That doctor might have been experiencing fluency, but Zinsser would argue he wasn't necessarily engaging in the art of rewriting, which is essential to producing quality work.
So it's not about speed, it's about really taking the time to craft and refine your message. What does that rewriting process actually look like? What's happening when we rewrite that makes the writing stronger?
It forces us to confront our own assumptions and to clarify our thinking. When we go back and reread what we've written with a critical eye, we often find that we haven't expressed ourselves as clearly as we thought we had. Rewriting allows us to identify those areas where our thinking is muddy or our language is imprecise.
It's like holding your writing up to the light and seeing all the little imperfections.
Exactly. And then it's about making those imperfections disappear one by one. Sometimes that means restructuring a sentence. Sometimes it means finding a more precise word. And sometimes it means cutting out entire sections that aren't serving the overall purpose of the piece.
You've got to be ruthless. I noticed that you marked up a lot of passages about clutter. What did Zinsser mean by that, and why is it such a big deal?
Zinser calls clutter the enemy of good writing. And it's something we encounter constantly in our reading and writing. It's anything that gets in the way of clear communication. Jargon, pretentious language, unnecessary words and phrases. Think about those corporate memos filled with buzzwords, or those instruction manuals that leave you more confused than when you started.
It's like they're trying to sound important, but they end up just muddying the waters.
Exactly. Zinser would argue that simplicity and clarity are far more effective than trying to impress your reader with fancy language. He gives some great examples of phrases that could be streamlined, like using head up instead of just
Okay.
head, or due to the fact that instead of simply because.
And then there are those words that are supposed to sound sophisticated, but just end up sounding pretentious, like paradigm or potentialize.
Right. Those words might sound impressive at first glance, but they often add more weight than meaning to your writing. And it's not just individual words. Think about those word clusters like, I might add, or it should be pointed out. They add nothing but fluff. Zinser would advocate for cutting straight to the chase.
So we've got to be ruthless editors, slashing and burning all that clutter. But Zinsser champions simplicity. And I'm wondering, how do we achieve that without sounding like we're writing a children's book? Where's that line between simplicity and, well, just being simplistic?
That's a great question. And it's a balance that all writers have to grapple with. The goal is to be clear and engaging without being simplistic or condescending to your reader. One key strategy is to use strong verbs and concrete details. Instead of relying on adverbs and qualifiers to prop up weak verbs, choose verbs that pack a punch.
Joe, don't tell.
Exactly. Zinser gives a fantastic example where he analyzes a student's writing. He shows how removing the first few paragraphs, which were filled with vague generalities, makes the writing instantly more personal and engaging.
It's like clearing the weeds to let the flowers bloom. You also underlined a section where Zinsser says, never say anything in writing that you wouldn't comfortably say in conversation. This seems to tie into finding your authentic voice. How do we make sure our writing reflects who we really are?
This is all about authenticity. Zinser encourages writers to embrace their individuality, quirks and all. Don't try to sound like someone you're not. He uses the example of H.L. Mencken, the journalist and social critic, who had this incredibly distinctive style, full of energy and irreverence. That style perfectly reflected his personality.
So it's about letting go of the idea that we have to sound formal or academic to be taken seriously.
Exactly. Embrace your own voice. If you wouldn't say it in a conversation, don't write it. Think about the writers whose work you admire. What makes their voices unique? What can you learn from them to help you develop your own distinctive style?
You flagged a lot of material about memoir. Why does Zinsser seem to think it's such a powerful form of writing?
Memoir allows writers to explore a specific time and place in their lives with incredible depth and intimacy. The key is to find a focus. Don't try to tell your entire life story. Choose a specific theme or period, like your childhood or a time of great change, and use vivid sensory details to bring that past to life.
He gives some wonderful examples of writers using sensory details to evoke specific memories, like Eudora Welty's description of growing up in a house filled with the sound of clocks.
Yes. And Alfred Kazin's use of smell to evoke his childhood in Brooklyn. These writers aren't just telling us about the past, they're transporting us there through their use of sensory detail. What sense memories from your own past would make evocative starting points for a memoir? What sights, sounds, or smells instantly take you back to a specific moment?
I love that he talks about memoir not just as a way of remembering the past, but as a way of understanding ourselves better in the present.
Absolutely. By exploring our past experiences, we gain a deeper understanding of who we are and how we came to be the people we are today.
Now, I was really struck by how engaging Zinsser made science writing sound. Is it really possible to make complex topics accessible to everyone? I mean, I've read my share of scientific papers that left me completely lost.
It definitely is. Zinsser argues that good science writing isn't about dumbing down the material. It's about clarity and storytelling. He uses the metaphor of an upside-down pyramid to illustrate this point. Start with a simple, easily digestible fact or concept, and then gradually broaden the scope, adding layers of complexity as you go.
He gives that fascinating example of an article about a chimpanzee playing tic-tac-toe. It starts with this simple anecdote that anyone can relate to, and then expands to discuss the implications of the research for understanding animal cognition and even the human brain.
It's a brilliant example of how to hook a reader with a compelling story and then use that story to illuminate a complex scientific topic. Think about a scientific concept that you find fascinating. How could you explain that concept to someone with no background in science? What kind of story could you tell to make it come alive?
He makes a great point about how scientists are often so focused on the data that they forget about the importance of communicating their findings in a way that's engaging and accessible to a wider audience.
Absolutely. It's not enough to simply present the facts. You have to connect with your reader on an emotional level and make them care about what you're saying.
Zisser seems to come back to the importance of detail again and again. Why is it so crucial in all types of writing?
Specific details help readers visualize and connect with what they are reading. They ground abstract concepts in the concrete and make historical accounts come alive.
He mentioned some really striking examples, like John McPhee's vivid descriptions of the Alaskan landscape in Coming Into the Country, or Joan Didion's portrayal of New California and Slouching Towards Bethlehem. He even talks about the importance of sensory details in something like a bird watching guide. It's about making those birds come alive on the page.
Think about a place that you know well. What specific details would bring that place to life for someone who has never been there? It could be your childhood home, a favorite park, or even a bustling city street. What sights, sounds, and smells would you use to capture its essence?
It's about painting a picture with words, right? Making the reader feel like they're right there with you. You also highlighted a lot of Zinsser's advice on conducting interviews. Why are they so important for nonfiction writers?
Interviews allow writers to capture the voices and experiences of others, adding depth and authenticity to their writing. It's not just about getting the information you need. It's about building rapport and allowing the interviewee's voice to shine through.
He also talks about being prepared with questions, but being willing to deviate if the conversation takes an interesting turn, right?
Exactly. Having a list of questions is essential. But sometimes the most insightful moments come when you allow yourself to go off script and follow a new thread that emerges organically from the conversation.
It's about striking that balance between structure and spontaneity. And of course, always fact check those quotes.
Absolutely. Accuracy is paramount in nonfiction writing. You have a responsibility to ensure that what you're reporting is true and that your interviewees are represented fairly.
Speaking of capturing voices, I remember you flagging a point about avoiding journalese. Can you remind me what Zinsser meant by that?
Yes. Journalese is that tired, cliche-ridden writing that we often see in newspapers and magazines. It's the kind of writing that relies on lazy shortcuts instead of fresh, original language. Zinsser gives a hilarious example of a news story about a policeman getting shot. The writing is just riddled with cliches. Shouldered his way, crashing into his face. You can practically hear the writer yawning as they typed it.
It's like they're just going through the motions, relying on those stock phrases instead of really engaging with the material. No wonder readers are tuning out.
Exactly. Zinsser wants us to be word freaks, to cultivate a deep love and respect for language. He urges us to fight those cliches and to choose our words carefully. He wants us to read widely, both contemporary writers and the masters, and to use dictionaries to deepen our understanding of the nuances of language. He even suggests getting a dictionary of synonyms.
So we should be constantly expanding our vocabulary and refining our understanding of how words work. But how do we know which words are good and which are cheap? I mean, language is constantly changing, right? What might be considered jargon today could be standard usage tomorrow.
That's a great question. Usage has no fixed boundaries, and even language experts disagree on what's acceptable. Zinsser talks about a panel of language experts who voted on whether to accept certain words and phrases. They tended to be liberal in accepting new words, but conservative in grammar.
It's a fascinating example of how language is constantly evolving.
So it sounds like there's no easy answer. Are there any rules of thumb we can use to navigate this ever-shifting landscape of language?
One helpful guideline is to distinguish between usage and jargon. Zinsser gives the example of prioritize. It sounds more important than rank, but ultimately it's just a pompous word. On the other hand, bottom line is a metaphor that's become widely accepted because it conveys a clear image that we can all picture. So it's not about rejecting all new words or phrases. It's about choosing language that enhances clarity and avoids unnecessary jargon.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the big picture. You highlighted a section where Zinsser talks about the importance of thinking small when choosing a topic, especially for longer pieces. What do you think he meant by that?
I think he's saying that it's better to focus on a specific aspect of your subject and explore it in depth than to try to cover too much ground and end up with a superficial piece. Don't try to be all things to all people.
Right. Find that unique angle, that specific corner of your subject that you can really delve into. And it's not just about the scope of your topic. Zinsser also emphasizes the importance of identifying the single provocative thought you want to leave with your reader. What's the one aha moment you want them to take away?
That's such a brilliant point. It gives your writing purpose and direction. Zinsser gives that great example of the lead of a newspaper column about hot dogs. It starts with two very short, punchy sentences. I've often wondered what goes into a hot dog. Now I know, and I wish I didn't. It's funny, intriguing, and it immediately makes you want to know more.
It's a masterclass in crafting a compelling lead. He analyzes how the writer uses a combination of facts, humor, and a compelling quotation to hook the reader and keep them engaged. And he also mentions some leads to avoid, like the future archaeologist or the visitor from Mars.
Oh, yes, those tired tropes that make you want to roll your eyes. Zinsser is urging us to strive for originality and freshness in our writing, even when tackling familiar subjects.
Absolutely. He's all about finding that unexpected detail or observation that will make your writing stand out from the crowd. Speaking of originality, you also highlighted a section about finding a unique lead. It sounds like Zinsser is a big fan of the element of surprise.
He definitely is. He believes that the most memorable leads often come from an unexpected detail or observation. He gives the example of an article about the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right. Instead of starting with a dry historical overview, the writer uses a simple evocative anecdote about a Bedouin boy throwing a stone into a cave. That simple act sets the stage for this incredible historical discovery.
It's such a brilliant technique. It immediately draws the reader in, makes them feel like they're part of the story. Zinsser also talks about finding inspiration in everyday life, from road signs to junk mail, to find a fresh perspective on your subject.
It's about training yourself to see the world with a writer's eye, to be constantly on the lookout for those small details that can spark an idea or illuminate a larger truth.
So pay attention to the world around you. There are stories everywhere. But once we've found our story and crafted our lead, how do we know when to stop? When is a piece truly finished?
That's a question every writer wrestles with. Zinsser warns against letting a piece drag on too long. He says, a piece that doesn't end where it should stop becomes a drag and therefore a failure.
Ouch. That's a harsh truth, but a necessary one. So how do we know where to stop? How do we find that perfect ending?
He argues that the ending should leave the reader with that one provocative thought you identified at the beginning. Once you've delivered it, stop. Don't belabor the point or try to add any unnecessary flourishes.
He gives the example of an essay about President Coolidge that ends with this simple but incredibly impactful statement. He had no ideas, and he was not a nuisance.
It's perfect. It sums up Coolidge's presidency in a nutshell and leaves you with a clear, memorable impression.
I noticed that you highlighted a lot of the Zinssers' advice on word choice. He's clearly a champion of strong, active verbs.
He calls verbs the most important tools for a writer because they propel the sentence forward and give it momentum. Active verbs create a sense of energy and movement. While passive verbs can make your writing feel weak and lifeless, he provides some excellent examples of how to replace passive constructions with more active and engaging language. It's amazing how much of a difference a single word can make.
He also urges us to be precise in our language. Choose words that convey a clear meaning and avoid vague generalities.
He's a firm believer in showing, not telling. Instead of saying someone was unhappy, describe their facial expression, their body language, the words they muttered under their breath. Instead of saying something was expensive, give specific details about the cost. It's all about painting a vivid picture for your reader.
He also talks about writing with authority. What do you mean by that?
It's about believing in yourself and your message. Don't undermine your writing with qualifiers or hesitant language. If you think something is important, state it clearly and directly.
So no waffling. No hiding behind vague pronouncements. State your case with conviction.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to let your personality shine through. He encourages using contractions to create a more conversational tone, making your writing sound more natural and authentic, as if you were speaking directly to the reader.
But he does caution against using contractions like I'd, right, because they can be ambiguous.
Right. I'd can mean both I had and I would, which can create confusion for the reader. It's a small detail, but it highlights Zinssers' attention to precision and clarity.
I also remember you flagging a rather surprising section about dictation. Zinsser seems to have some strong feelings about that.
He does. He believes that dictation robs writers of their personality and leads to lifeless, impersonal prose. He encourages us to write with our own hand, to physically engage with the process of putting words on paper. He sees it as a more intimate and thoughtful process.
It's interesting to think about how the physical act of writing might influence our thinking and the way we express ourselves.
Absolutely. There's something about the tactile experience of putting pen to paper that can spark creativity and lead to more nuanced and thoughtful writing.
You also highlighted some of Zinsser's thoughts on paragraphing, which I found fascinating. It's something that many writers struggle with. What insights does he offer?
He sees paragraphs as units of thought, each with its own integrity of content and structure. They're not just arbitrary chunks of text. Each paragraph should contribute to the overall flow and coherence of the piece, guiding the reader through your argument or narrative.
He also addresses a really important issue, which is sexism in language. This is clearly a topic he feels strongly about.
Absolutely. He acknowledges the importance of using non-sexist language and avoiding words or phrases that perpetuate gender stereotypes. He suggests finding alternative terms that are gender neutral or converting nouns into verbs to avoid using potentially offensive language.
It's a reminder that language is powerful and that we need to be mindful of the impact our words can have.
He's not just talking about political correctness. He's talking about respecting your readers and being aware of the ways in which language can be used to exclude or marginalize certain groups.
Zinsser also offers some really practical advice on revising and editing your work. He suggests reading your writing aloud to catch awkward phrasing or clunky sentences. And he encourages us to pay attention to transitions to ensure that the piece flows smoothly from one idea to the next.
He has that great example where he takes a typical paragraph and dissects it, showing how seemingly small changes in word choice, sentence structure, and even punctuation can transform a piece of writing from mediocre to masterful. It's like watching a surgeon at work.
It's amazing how much we can learn from analyzing the work of skilled writers.
Absolutely. It's like taking a master class in writing. You get to see the thought process behind each decision and understand the principles that underpin great writing.
He also talks about the importance of establishing credibility with your reader.
He warns against inflating incidents or making false statements to make your writing more sensational. He emphasizes the importance of honesty and accuracy in nonfiction writing. Don't sacrifice your integrity for a catchy story.
It's about building trust with your reader. If they sense that you're not being truthful or that you're manipulating the facts, they'll be less likely to believe anything you say.
He also has some interesting thoughts about the role of the editor. He believes that the relationship between a writer and an editor should be one of collaboration and mutual respect.
So it's not about the editor dictating changes. It's about working together to make the piece the best it can be.
Exactly. He acknowledges that editors play an important role in clarifying and shaping a writer's work, but he also warns against editors who overstep their bounds and try to impose their own voice or opinions on a piece.
It's about finding an editor who understands your vision and who can help you achieve it without compromising your own voice and style.
He also has some sage advice for aspiring writers. He encourages young writers to embrace their own individuality, to write about what they care about, and to develop their own unique style.
So don't try to imitate other writers. Find your own voice and let it sing.
He emphasizes the importance of finding your own voice and writing with confidence and authenticity. He also encourages writers to take risks and to experiment with different forms and styles. He reminds us that writing is a craft that can be learned and honed with practice.
So don't be afraid to experiment. Step outside your comfort zone and try new things. You never know what you might discover about yourself as a writer.
He also stresses the importance of finding joy in the process of writing. Don't let it become a chore.
Find ways to make it fun and engaging.
He tells a great story about his own early experiences as a writer and the valuable lessons he learned from his father, who was a successful businessman.
I love how he emphasizes the importance of hard work, perseverance, and a commitment to quality. He also stresses the importance of finding joy in the process of writing.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between discipline and delight. You need to be willing to put in the hard work, but you also need to find ways to make the process enjoyable.
He encourages us to see writing as a form of entertainment, to find ways to surprise and delight our readers.
He believes that the best writing is infused with a sense of playfulness and energy. He encourages us to let our personalities shine through and to have fun with the process.
I think that's such an important point. When we enjoy what we're doing, it shows in our writing.
It's about finding that balance between discipline and delight. You need to be willing to put in the hard work, but you also need to find ways to make the process enjoyable.
He also touches on the importance of structure and organization in writing. It can be tempting to just dive in and start writing, but Zinsser seems to believe that a well-structured piece is essential for clarity and coherence.
Absolutely. He's a big proponent of outlining. Taking the time to plan your piece before you start writing can save you a lot of headaches down the road. It helps ensure that your thoughts flow logically and that your argument is well supported.
So resist that urge to just let the words flow. Take a step back and map out your ideas before you start writing.
He also talks about the importance of pacing, of varying the rhythm and tempo of your writing to keep the reader engaged.
So it's not just about what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. He encourages us to use a variety of sentence lengths and structures to mix those short, punchy sentences with longer, more complex ones. It creates a sense of movement and flow that keeps the reader from getting bored.
And, of course, he talks about the importance of voice. He seems to believe that every writer has a unique voice that should be nurtured and developed.
He encourages us to write in a way that feels natural and authentic to us, to let our personalities shine through in our writing. It goes back to that idea of never saying anything in writing that you wouldn't comfortably say in conversation.
It's about being true to yourself and letting your own unique perspective come through in your writing. He also has some interesting thoughts about the creative process. He seems to believe that writing is a process of discovery, of exploring ideas and finding new ways to express ourselves.
He encourages us to be open to new ideas, to experiment with different approaches, and to allow our writing to take us in unexpected directions. Sometimes the most interesting discoveries come when we're willing to let go of our preconceived notions and just see where the writing takes us.
It's about embracing that sense of exploration and being open to the unexpected. He also talks about the importance of revision, which seems to be a recurring theme throughout the book.
Absolutely. He sees revision as an essential part of the writing process, a way to refine our ideas and to make our writing stronger and more effective.
It can be tempting to think that once we've finished a first draft, we're done. But Zinsser would argue that the real work begins with revision.
He encourages us to read our work aloud, to get feedback from others,
Yeah.
and to be willing to make significant changes to our writing in order to improve it.
It's about letting go of that attachment to our first draft and being open to the idea that our writing can always be better. Now, speaking of revision and the challenges of writing, you also highlighted a section about writing about place. Why do you think Zinsser finds this to be such a powerful way to connect with readers?
I think it goes back to that idea of using details to bring your writing to life. When we write about a specific place, we're grounding our ideas in the concrete. We're giving our readers a tangible world to inhabit, a landscape they can visualize and connect with emotionally.
He gives some really compelling examples of writers who use place to great effect, like Joan Didion's portrayal of the New California in Slouching Towards Bethlehem.
She captures the sense of rootlessness and unease that permeated California in the 1960s through her vivid descriptions of the landscape and the people who inhabited it. She makes you feel the heat, the smog, the sense of disorientation that characterized that time and place.
He also talks about John McPhee's writing about Alaska and coming into the country.
McPhee uses precise details to create a sense of place, capturing the vastness and beauty of the Alaskan wilderness and the unique challenges of life in such a remote and unforgiving environment. You feel like you're right there with him, hiking through the mountains, battling the elements, experiencing the raw power of that landscape.
And he even talks about the power of place in memoir, citing Richard Rodriguez's reflections on growing up in a Spanish-speaking home in Hunger of Memory.
Rodriguez uses language to bridge the gap between his childhood world and the English-speaking world he entered as a student. He explores the complex relationship between language, identity, and belonging, all rooted in his experiences of specific places.
I love how Zinser highlights how these writers use place not just as a backdrop, but as a way of illuminating larger themes and ideas.
Exactly. Place isn't just a setting, it's a character in the story. It shapes the lives of the people who inhabit it and informs the way they see the world.
And Zinser encourages us to think about the places that hold special meaning for us.
What details would we use to bring those places to life for our readers? What stories would we tell to capture their essence? What sights, sounds, and smells would evoke those places most vividly?
It's a wonderful invitation to explore our own personal geographies and to share them with the world. You also highlighted some material about humor writing, which seems like a particularly challenging genre. What insights does Zinser offer for those of us who want to make our readers laugh?
He acknowledges that humor is subjective, and that what one person finds funny, another might find offensive or simply not amusing. It's a delicate balancing act. But he also believes that humor is a powerful tool for writers, and that it can be used to make serious points in a more engaging and memorable way.
I love how he talks about humor not as something separate from serious writing, but as a way of enhancing it.
Exactly. Humor can be a way of disarming your reader, of making them more receptive to your message. It can also be a way of highlighting absurdity or pointing out hypocrisy in a way that's both entertaining and thought-provoking.
He talks about the importance of timing, of setting up a joke and then delivering the punchline at just the right moment.
It's like a dance. You have to have a feel for the rhythm of language and a sense of when to pause and when to let the joke land.
He also emphasizes the importance of being authentic, of writing humor that feels natural and true to your own voice and sensibilities.
He gives the example of E.B. White, whose humor was often gentle and self-deprecating, but always insightful and thought-provoking. It wasn't about trying to be funny. It was about seeing the world with a wry and observant eye and sharing those observations with his readers.
It's about finding the humor in everyday life, in the little absurdities that make us human. He also talks about the importance of being fearless, of being willing to push boundaries and to take risks with your humor.
He cites writers like Art Brookwald and Gary Trudeau, whose satirical humor often targets powerful institutions and individuals, holding them accountable for their actions.
It's about using humor as a weapon for social change, a way to challenge the status quo and to make people think differently about the world around them.
And sometimes the most effective way to deliver a message is to make people laugh.
Hmm.
It can be disarming, it can create a sense of connection, and it can make a serious message more palatable.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Zinssers on writing well, what are the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will remember?
I think the most important thing Zinsser emphasizes is that good writing is about clarity, humanity, and the courage to be yourself. It's not about showing off your vocabulary or trying to sound literary. It's about connecting with your reader and leaving them with one thought they didn't have before.
He reminds us that writing is a craft that can be learned and honed with practice. It's about being willing to put in the hard work, to revise and refine, and to constantly strive to improve.
And it's also about finding joy in the process. It's about seeing writing as a form of discovery, of exploration, and even of play.
So to our listener, we'll leave you with a challenge. What will you write today? And how will you make it sing?